Still morning, 11:45 on the dot. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this panel session. I'm going to invite my panelists to please switch on your cameras and your microphones. We'll start with intros in a moment. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the session. I see the numbers are still climbing. To start, my name is Shingai Manjengwa, and I lead professional development at the Vector Institute. My formal title is Director of Professional Development, but I deal with technical and non-technical education for artificial intelligence. So it is my absolute pleasure to bring you our three guest speakers today who will be educating us on artificial intelligence for startups and scale-ups. So just as we're getting started, I'd like to shout out to my two colleagues from the Vector Institute behind the scenes, Chiara Lacey and Michiel Vos, who've been involved in making this event happen. All right, so without further ado, let's meet our panelists. So I'm actually going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. And Andrew, you get first pick. Who are you? What brings you here?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all, Shingai. I really appreciate this. My name's Andrew Peak. I'm the CEO of a company called Delphia. And Delphia is an investment strategy, an AI-driven investment strategy that anybody can improve by contributing their data.
Fantastic. And Karen, hi, welcome.
Okay, nice to meet you all at the Toronto Machine Learning Summit. My name is Karen Chen, and I'm the co-founder and chief engineering officer at Wisdom AI. Wisdom AI is a conversational AI analytics and operations company. We enable organizations to track the performance of their virtual agents and also uncover actionable insights from customer conversations. This leads to a better virtual agent experience, streamlined training, contact center efficiency, and much more.
Fantastic. So we've got financial services and natural language processing in the house today. Humera, hi and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Come from a completely different side. So I'm Humera Malik. I'm founder, CEO of Canvas AI. And we are trying to solve all of the world's biggest challenges on the industrial side. So we've actually built a purpose-built AI platform to empower the industrial workforce so they can start to work with their data and start solving their own problems without relying on anybody. So this is built for process and asset optimization. What that means at the end of the day, produce more with less costs and actually produce less carbon emissions as well. So a byproduct of everything that we do always feeds into reducing carbon emissions and the GHG goals as well.
That is very noble. We know that artificial intelligence is an area that carbon emissions, new focus and a lot of focus on making sure that we're running efficient ML. So Humera, you've kind of got the topic going here. Maybe let's start with how are you actually deploying AI in your organization? And Humera, you sort of started alluding to it, so I'll let you continue. What are the ways that you're deploying AI right now?
So I'll break it down into two things. One is how we're building and then how that's been deployed. How we're building is the whole concept started with how do we make it more usable and accessible by everybody in a particular sector. So what we're doing is basically building a user experience and embedding, I say always this, which is we have engineered the AI and exposed it through a user experience. So we're big believers in that. So one of the ways that we have taken this path is building it, making it usable and accessible, and hiding the complexities behind. And not hiding in the sense of making black box, but hiding in the sense where you don't have to be a coder or a data scientist, but exposing it to this particular workforce so that they're augmenting their skill sets. How we're deploying it really is all about how we empower the people to use it. So AI is always thought of about, you go out to deployment, it's a very complex infrastructure that you require. So as we talk further, I'm hoping in this panel, we had to make it somehow more usable and simple because we didn't need necessarily neural nets to solve all the problems. Sometimes we had to come to very simple technologies as well. So we've now built it in a way where you start solving problems with simple algorithms and simple models, and then you go towards more complex. So the way the workflows has been built is go for the simpler ones. You don't necessarily need to consume all that power. That's how we're deploying it. It's starting it with in a manner where you start to solve some problems with simple AI and simple algorithms, and then go towards complex. And so it's basically our whole idea around deployment has been is make it user-friendly, make it accessible, make it usable, make it explainable, so that people don't have to think about this hidden technology that's going to take over my work, but it's actually built for me. And that's the concept around which we have built our entire platform.
Fantastic. So Karen, we heard the word simple mentioned a few times. Does that apply to deploying models in NLP?
Well, let's put it this way. When we started the company almost 10 years ago, we developed an expert question answering system for enterprise, which takes in natural language queries. We have then evolved our NLP stack, created our own virtual assistant platform, and we are now extended our product offering to include a conversational AI analytics and operations platform. Unfortunately, I would say understanding the new human language is a very complex task. Like over the years, we have used a lot of AI algorithms to perform natural language processing tasks like intent classification, entity extraction, sentiment analysis, summarization, like keyword extraction, clustering, like you name it all. But like we actually have seen firsthand the evolution of AI in the NLP space. So I think we evolved from the linguistics models to the kind of deep learning models like TextCNN, BERT, GPT-3, like MTNLG, etc. So I would say like it starts off being a very complicated problem, but with the industry actually providing a lot of these like ML as a service APIs, it has actually become much simpler to consume some of these like tech giants APIs and actually use it in natural language processing.
Fantastic. And you're right, the field of NLP has changed so much. I was working on a tutorial with one of the vector researchers the other day, and I said, okay, so we've done tokenization, we'll do stemming. And he looked at me like, we're not doing that anymore. And I was like, oh, okay. Back in the day, we had to do that. All right, so Andrew, you're up next. You can tell us about how your organization is deploying AI.
Yeah, so our context is that we are forecasting equities and specifically the fundamentals of thousands of US equities. And we do this every day repeatedly across multiple horizons. And so you can safely assume that sort of everything is, the time series is the most pertinent thing, and the alignment of multiple time series in all the data we consume is critical, because if anything should be off by even a small fraction, there's huge downstream consequences for us. And as a result, to Humera's point, I wouldn't say we're using anything that's overly complex today, right? We're starting with more of a simple tooling set, things that include like XGBoost, or SHAP feature selection, or Kalman filter maximum likelihood, or light gradient boost, these kinds of things. And for us, the tooling is almost the second step after you've really got the problem architected quite well. And we will increase like sophistication with some of the techniques we're using, but I suspect that will be in the second or third quarter of this year. So
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's about that initial problem statement and what problem is your organization trying to solve. And I imagine we do have, founders in the room, people who might be thinking of starting AI projects. For all of you to be thinking about how to make this more user-centric and simpler, Humera, you must have started somewhere. Did you start in a complex place and then realize, okay, we actually need to strip things down? What do you wish you had known back then that you now know?
I couldn't agree more on that statement. Yes. Lots of learnings, lots of hard lessons and sweat gone over this. When we first started, we were out there to solve the most complex problem. And then we had to tone ourselves back a little bit to say, it's not about solving the most complex problem, because we're engineers, we're a whole bunch of engineers, and we think we can go tackle and solve the world hunger. But then we recognize that you have to take small steps towards it and first start with some simpler. So yes, we had some hard learnings where it's not about implementing neural nets in the first go or starting with reinforcement learning. You have to give it time in order to get there. So we worked our way backwards. So we've had those hard learnings, and now the way we've actually built it is start with some linear experiments. Then you go into tree-based, then you go into some neural nets, then you go into reinforcement side. So it's really, that's the path that I was referring to earlier from a usability as well, is get them started. But sometimes you also have to, not just giving the tool, it's also about helping them learn through that experience, that it's okay. It's all about experimentation. You always learn. and you fail, you learn, and then you go and improve on it. So we have to build it this way from a workflow perspective, but also actually add an aspect of education on top of it so that people are well guided. So it's a very guided workflow that allows people, because anybody in like us who's an engineer would go try to solve the hardest problem. So you have to basically implement those learnings in a way so people also understand and they don't have to go through the same. So yes, we ended up doing that.
And Karen, what do you wish you had known back when you started?
So for us, like we knew that the tech giants are actually investing a lot of money into AI research. But the problem is until they publish the papers or made it available to the public, we're in the dark. We're not aware of what's coming and how we can actually apply their research to industry. So we also went through a lot of research, trial and error, experimentation ourselves to build our own domain-specific models to solve these NLP tasks. Like, it takes like millions of dollars to train like GPT-3. Like quite frankly, as a startup, we would never have the deep pockets that they have to actually spend on research of that scale. So I think at this stage, again, like we're actually scaling down on a little bit on the research portion of this, and we are relying more on pre-trained models and the available like machine learning APIs. And we're actually happy to focus on applying AI to industry use. I think that would be the most efficient for startups. Yeah.
Thanks. And Andrew, what do you wish you had known?
Well, I wish I had known the power of starting with a constraint. So you can choose a really if you choose a really valuable constraint, like an outcome, for example, in our world, being in the investment business, the constraint we eventually found our way towards was sort of low volatility. And so then we started to sort of organize our framework around degrees of freedom, right? So we retargeted our ML, the methods we chose, how we sort of weighted any nonlinear relationship that would surface in the data. We now treat everything, all these nonlinear relationships, like weak learners, and we look for consensus amongst them. And all of that thinking came out of the original constraint, which is, well, people aren't going to want to ride a roller coaster with their investment dollars. They're going to want something that marches forward steadily in a predictable way. And so there's a lot of power in sort of starting with one of those as something you're shooting for.
And in terms of challenges that it could be past challenges or current challenges, what would you say really right now you're still grappling with?
So compute is a real thing. So, SHAP feature selection is something we do a lot of, and we have huge ambition for. So we're actually asking individuals to contribute their data to improve our stock selection. And we'd love to get to the place where we can tell you how much alpha your data contributed to our picture, our overall picture, our investment returns. Really, the rate limiter on all of this is compute. And so, knowing sort of how to roll things up and attribution, I think is going to be a challenge for us for 5 or so years. And it's exciting, but it's also it's a puzzle.
And that's kind of where we started Humera, right? We were talking about efficient ML because then that compute also needs to be used very efficiently. Humera, what would you say is an ongoing challenge that you're currently facing?
One of the ongoing challenges, which I'm sure any of the AI companies faces in general, is the myth around this and the acceptance and the trust and the confidence that has to be built with people. I think that's an ongoing challenge that I've seen even from the beginning, even till now. Even though you would think that there's a lot of awareness and education about this, I still find at places that we come across that myth about, oh, it's a black box, because that black box should be put behind now. Like, we're so now ahead in this game that there is no more of that black box approach. Everything is out there that you can actually go with. There's explainable AI available. I'm sure, everybody here on the panel understands that, but it's just when you go out and talk to and you start to implement this, that always comes up. And I feel that still continues to be a challenge, at least in the industries that we work in.
Awesome. Karen, what would you say is an ongoing challenge for you?
So there's actually a few. So like I will start with like kind of setting expectations, right? Like when artificial intelligence for natural language processing first come out, like people were having like big ambitions and thinking that like it could understand everything that the human says. But like if you have worked with like Alexa, Siri, etc., we started to realize that this is not always the case. Like there's a lot of ambiguity in the human language. So I think setting the expectations right. And then I think with the proliferation of these like digital assistants in the market, like people started to realize that they're not all magic, and they started to adjust the way how they talk to AI. And actually that has helped a lot in setting expectations. I think the other challenge that we're having is that AI is growing at such a fast pace, and a large number of research papers are published every day. Like it is actually impossible to keep up and try all the latest technology. And for us, like finding the focus within the company and actually balancing the amount of experimentation, like research against the product deadlines is always challenging. It's also hard to find and retain talent. And I want to thank Vector Institute and the Toronto Machine Learning Society for bringing together local AI researchers and companies to network. That would help a lot. Yeah.
That's great. And so I'm just going to invite folks that are here. If you've got questions for our panelists, please go ahead and let us know. You can just type them in the chat and I'll keep an eye out for that. But just as we're getting into sort of the end of our session, really, it's gone by so quickly. What advice would you have for startup founders, co-founders, and other folks who are starting this journey? So you are all established, but somebody who's at the beginning of this, with all the constraints that you've mentioned and all the learnings that you've had to go through, what would you say to those folks? And Andrew, what do you think? What are you going to say to our founders?
I love this question. I think as in a founder's position, you have to get very concrete with your appetite for investment in any sort of problem set. I think it's very easy to create sort of an unlimited scope or scope in perpetuity. And, the nature of a startup is constrained resources. And so, being very articulate and concrete with what your appetite for investment in solving each particular problem is. And it probably should not be large over and over again. It has to be modest in certain places if you're going to use those resources effectively.
All right, Humera.
I think just building on what Andrew said, I think one thing which is very important for any founder that gets into this to understand is know the problem set, know the constraints of the problem, and AI might be one answer to it. So knowing that problem is very important before you start to apply the AI side. And the other is being able to see the outcome of it, because it shouldn't just be an ambiguous thing. It should be an outcome based. And I think there's something that Karen touched on, which there's a lot of things that are already built out there. You just got to take that and build on top of it. A lot of research work, Googles of the world, Microsofts of the world, everybody is building the basics of what those algorithms and things are. Focus on building the usability around solving a particular problem. I think that's what I would say. Otherwise, you can lose a lot of cycles into trying to see how I can fit AI into this problem that I don't even understand how it's solvable. So I think a lot of that base work is done. Go build the usability around solving a particular problem so that you can actually measure the outcome of it.
Thank you, Humera. And Karen, advice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Andrew and Humera said about like the focus, and also about kind of constraining the amount of time that you spend on like just the research work. But another thing that I want to touch on is, I think with like the growing privacy and ethics concerns, like applications of AI, like we should be thinking more about how to actually protect the model, like basically to prevent people from actually using kind of private data in the models and all that. Like, I think the security and governance is starting to grow. And this is one area that I think when you actually start a startup, in order to gain the trust of your customers, you actually ought to think in this direction.
All right, so I've got time for just one question, and that's come from Matthew in the chat. Can you talk a bit about your data science teams, or certainly when you were starting out? Minimum size of the team? Do you start with the generalists? Do you want to start with specialists? Just some quick comments, round robin. Andrew, I'll start with you.
We're about 6 or 7, or maybe 8, I guess. And we have folks, you almost have to love empirical finance to do data science at Delphia, because again, that's the context in which we're working. And so if you're someone who like just wants to sort of grab tools and apply things, you will feel overly constrained when we zero in on that context. And so folks generally have a love of empirical finance and are using sort of creative tooling on top of that. So
Fantastic. So we've got a domain, quite a specific domain if you want to work with Andrew's team. Humera, any comments on your team?
Yeah, so we've got a team of data scientists and machine learning engineers that has actually evolved over the course of time, because initially it was more around research work, but now it's more around the practicality and the application. So we've got people that have actually come from engineering backgrounds and some from the industrial and mechanical backgrounds that are actually then gone into data science as well. So we've got a good mix there. And I would say that's what you learn. You have to really find your own niche, what you're trying to do. If your work is more around research, go look for the research people. We made that mistake earlier because we weren't into research. We were actually into building this. And that's really where there's a good combination now of data scientists and machine learning engineers. So find your own balance of what you're doing. If you're building, then you've got to find that balance of people who can build. If you're doing more research, then go for the more research-oriented folks.
Thank you. And Karen, to close us out.
Okay, like in general, I think it depends on the stage of the company. Like when we first started, like I remember I was the first developer of the company, and then we slowly grow the team to like now, like we have about 10 NLP engineers and data scientists. Like, so I think there's no minimum size to start. It depends on the stage, but like of the company. But I think in the early stage, a generalist is actually better for you, because like then they can actually handle even the back end, front end, and not just the research. And then as you grow your business and actually go into more specialization, you need to build up a team of specialists like in your area. So I think a good mix, and depending on what stage of the company.
Fantastic. All right, folks, we're actually at time, believe it or not. Time flies when you're learning from smart people. Thank you, Andrew, Humera, and Karen for joining us today. Really appreciate your insights. Stay in touch, everyone. Find these great people on LinkedIn, etc. And we'll see you in upcoming sessions. Thank you again, Andrew, Humera, and Karen.
Thank you for having us.